Okay, folks, we are live here. Pre-game, the usual pre-game as I get my tech set up. So there might be no one here yet. That's okay. I'm getting tech set up and getting some disclaimers posted. So I like to get here a little bit early, as we know. So this will be on the broadcast. This will be on the broadcast when it is this now, but also in the when the recording is released by Ed. And so I am getting material posted now. And hope everyone is doing well. If you're watching this video, folks are not going to show up just yet. So again, it's my usual pregame routine here, which is not new. So this is just the pregame preliminary for Unfound on the Ground number 18. The disappearance of Judge Crater. And of course, we're referring to Judge Joseph Crater, which we'll get more into that. I'm here making sure that the sound is working and getting my workspace set up. Hard to believe we're on 18 episodes now, number 18. A good testimony to the work of Ed and our team and the think tank members and ultimately the viewers, whoever views, watches, shares these Unfound programs. We had a good episode last time, which is now publicly viewable and searchable. The number 17 episode, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. I'm also going to post here, so I don't have to worry about it later. I'll mention it, right? We have our playlist here. And I would encourage folks to visit that, watch past episodes, share it. I'm going to put it in the chat here. And many will recall, some will recall. Maybe it's new to you if you're just watching this for the first time, maybe watching a recording on YouTube when this one is eventually released. We had started with Zoom as a platform, which was helpful. Had its pros and cons, like any platform, just like YouTube Live. But a decision was made by Ed and the team to shift to the use of YouTube Live to make the episodes, which we've been doing now for a while. And so we're continuing on that path for sure. I also provide here the website. Again, I'm putting in the chat. I kind of like the chat. There are trade-offs with any platform, but I like the chat because it gives me the ability to sort of post sort of a live bibliography while we're going, which are resources, depending on what people get interested in. So we have about 5 minutes. We are in the pregame. Again, tonight we'll be covering the disappearance of Judge Crater. And I'll say more about that when we start officially in about 5 minutes. We also have I put the website there, which I'll say more about in the chat, but theunfoundpodcast.com, theunfoundpodcast.com. If you're watching this video, go ahead and visit that site, get all the great updates from Ed, and of course, share it. And I also posted there in the chat the YouTube playlist for Unfound on the Ground. So as of now, you'll see 17 there. This 18th will be released in the future on our usual cycle of doing that when Ed releases it. But if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and watch those old episodes. Maybe rewatch, watch, whatever. Something that you might find helpful. Some of the earlier discussions, especially now as we're looping back to apply sort of a shift towards studying more specifically some historical cases. So, you can go ahead and look back on some of those older episodes. We covered some important topics anyway. But now that we're starting to talk about some of these historical cases, and then you will see some of the discussions of the things that we're now trying to apply. And of course, please consider sharing those, either the playlist itself or the individual episodes. Of course, the Unfound on the Ground is tied to the broader Unfound framework or ship, whatever term you want to use. Of course, the primary aspect of that are Ed's podcasts, episodes, and then, he has his Sunday night think tank, generally on Sunday nights. He has the live show on Wednesday nights. And then there's other sorts of things that you see, whether it be on the posts on theunfoundpodcast.com or social media activity, different things that he may supplement on YouTube or wherever. And then, of course, this Unfound on the Ground, which is a collaborative effort. So I will wait. We have about 2 more minutes until we officially start. And then we will get going. So again, this is that usual pregame that I use to get here and make sure all the tech's in order and so forth, and saves a little time on getting some of the usual preliminary or standard material posted in the chat. This is May 8th, 2022, Sunday. We are set to begin officially at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:15 p.m. where I'm at in the Mountain Time Zone. And then, of course, that's 7 p.m. Central Time and 7:15 p.m. Central Time and 5:15 p.m. Pacific Time. Right? Pacific Time. So I hope everyone's doing well and continuing to, again, keep an eye out for Unfound YouTube channel and social media activity. But again, you can find all that relevant information on the unfoundpodcast.com, the unfoundpodcast.com. I'm just going to do my usual quick double check on Facebook and my one email account just to make sure that no one has any technical questions or access questions, and don't see that. So those are closed out. And so we now are officially beginning. And so the topic tonight, again, is this is Unfound on the Ground number 18. And that's the disappearance of Judge Crater. And that's Judge Joseph Force Crater. You'll sometimes see his full name rendered as. Again, I'm going to go through some of the usual material here. This episode, The Disappearance of Judge Crater, Unfound on the Ground number 18, will be recorded video and audio, including the text chat. Chat participation is an option. For the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound, the audio and video recording, including text chat, of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound. By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the rendering of your words for journalistic, promotional, and/or commercial purposes, with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. We have, again, the unfoundpodcast.com. Please visit and share that page. I'm not going to get into every detail now, but you'll get the updates from Ed about the program, the episodes. There is the data gem section, still in need of updating. And again, here in the months ahead, weeks ahead, hopefully days ahead, but probably more weeks, I have a plan. I'll work a plan with Ed to make sure to catch up on a number of our resources. However, I have since we've been using YouTube, I have certainly in all the chats, besides a clear mention, we have the links posted and so forth. We'll continue to make resources available. Kathy, how are you? Welcome, Kathy. And so, as always, we keep a strong focus on thoroughness and accuracy and the human element of any case that we care about. We care about all missing persons. And so that's something that we continue to. Again, I'm Eric Grabowski. I've been a guest on Unfound once for a case. I'm part of the assisting team and been collaborating with Ed and the team for Unfound on the Ground. As always, just my usual disclaimer. If I don't give it regularly, I should, right? So my views tonight don't necessarily represent those of my employing university. I am a communication professor, associate professor. I do cold case journalism on the side, freelance, citizen, whatever term you want to use. Whatever disclaimers you think you might need to give, go ahead and do that. Of course, we're using text. And so again, we're moving forward. Kathy, I'll just say a quick hello again and ask, have you, I know we mentioned this case in episode 11 when we did a historical overview, and I'll recap that, but any thoughts or thought much about Judge Crater's case, Kathy? And of course, might take a little bit of time for folks to type, and I'll just keep talking while folks might do that. So we did in episode 11 of Unfound on the Ground. This case was part of the historical overview. It actually was Ed's idea. And as I said then, I don't think that I even remembered or knew about this case, most likely. But it was a good suggestion and certainly one that we've opted to cover. The reference there that I had used, which is a good overview of the case, even in terms of the available materials, and that, of course, is, again, the Pennsylvania Center for the book, and I'll share that link. Okay, Kathy, had never heard of him before. I read his wiki twice, but that's all I know. Okay. Well, again, so this is an old case and an older case. And so we have a good overview here in this Pennsylvania Center for the Book page. Judge Crater disappeared in 1930. He was born in 1889. He was born in Pennsylvania, but would be spending his professional life as a judge, at least, in New York. And so he has that regional connection there. Now, this is a we can say this is a nationally known case. Certainly, it's not the sort of case that you would hear about like you would Hoffa, for instance, to go from the last episode. But it certainly is, as we'll see, a case that has some regional attention there in the northeast of the country. The case, another reason why, and we'll see more of this, why the case get interesting, and it sort of has that corruption and organized crime aspects at some levels in terms of the overall narrative of Judge Crater's life, allegedly. Right. So, but certainly that's something that'd be worthy of consideration. And on this PA Center for the Book, Pennsylvania Center for the Book, which is tied to the Penn State system there, there was some revival in interest in the early 1960s when Stella Wheeler Crater, who was the wife of Judge Crater, published a memoir entitled The Empty Robe that had revived some interest, and then that interest would drift away again. Then in 2005, there was a letter that was found, and again, I'm on the PA Center for the Book here, that was intended to be opened or instructed to be opened after that lady's death. And then that letter provided some insights or claims, let's call them claims, of people who murdered Judge Crater, and then a claim about the burial being under the boardwalk at Coney Island, where the New York Aquarium currently sits. And let me just continue with that quoting from this site. Due to the supposed location of Judge Crater's remains, there is little hope of recovering any remains or information. And there have been no new developments in the case since this letter was revealed in 2005. Now, this piece was posted in 2010. I haven't seen, and I am by no means, as I said on the Hoffa episode, I'm somewhat familiar about the material that's out there, but I would never consider myself a Hoffa expert. And on the Crater case, I'm certainly not an expert, and I'm not as familiar with that material as I am, say, with Hoffa. But I have some familiarity, largely in the lead up to this episode. So you get a pretty good glimpse, and I want to just disclaim this. There may be some things I'm missing out there, and I certainly, hopefully from this episode, because obviously we're saying, okay, in process, if we were to apply some things. Now, I don't necessarily intend to start, running intensely with this case to study. I certainly may change my mind at some point, but want to keep it on our horizon along those lines. And certainly there may be things out there I'm not familiar with, but based on what I've seen so far, it seems that, we got the gist of it, from the standpoint of what we can see. There's also a pretty good overview here on history.com, and history.com, and at least in this article, seems that they try to update that as best as they can. We don't know for sure. And again, it's pretty much the same conclusion. The difficulty of getting to that area to know if there are remains there. And so that's a challenge. And you can see that at the end of that history.com. And it does say that it was updated 2020. And I'm going to, I think, safely assume that this is a problem. You also mentioned here on the Pennsylvania site as well as the history.com, this idea of, pulling a crater, disappearing a Judge Crater, right? That became part of the discourse, right? Because of what happened. Of course, in this sort of case, did he choose to disappear? Obviously, there were some reasons to believe that he might have, and certainly there are some reasons to believe he didn't choose that. So even as those sorts of things enter the discourse, we want to be, cautious with that. So Kathy, we'll just come back to you. So seen in the big picture of what we know about studying disappearances, and obviously we had a lot of good discussion about Hoffa. This is obviously some similarities, but some differences, obviously. Where would you start with this sort of case? If you were going to pursue it more intensely or wanted to get that going. And again, I know it takes time to type, so I'm going to keep moving a little bit here. Obviously, one thing I would mention, just to see what's out there in terms of ongoing discussion. What's being said in the forums, what's being said on social media, and so forth. Of course, you can take or leave some of that stuff, and some is completely unhelpful. But you do find some people out there who might be more serious about this sort of discussion. And, whether you're looking to network with them or not, but there may be some helpful insights there that are interesting, but there may not, as we know. It might also give you a broader sense of who's been covering this with seriousness. Again, like we know on any case, but over time, especially the older cases, if there is inaccurate information out there, even well-meaning people tend to replicate it in media. Now, I'm not talking about things where people know there's a legitimate dispute about facts. I'm talking about straight up inaccurate information. And so we've talked about that problem with Len. But it would make sense to sort of study what's out there, and then identify in terms of credible websites, blogs, podcasts, documentaries, and so forth. What are those, credible outlets to sort of get started with? Just read a lot more about it. Like Hoffa, he sounded corrupt, a big womanizer, lots of political ties. He could have been murdered due to one of his dalliances, and of course that does seem to be a legitimate difference. So just to have that connection with Hoffa, of course, the corruption, allegations of corruption. Of course, Hoffa spent time in jail. I don't know and or think about Hoffa in terms of it doesn't seem, and again, I could be wrong, and I can stand corrected on this. Womanizing wasn't necessarily something that Hoffa is involved with. I don't remember reading anything substantial about him having even infidelity to his wife, but I'm just trying to be even on this. But certainly with Crater, at least it seems to be the case, or the allegations, the claims that he certainly was a womanizer, and lots of political ties. Absolutely. Yeah, of course, Hoffa had a lot of political or business or mafia and or whatever. No doubt. Lots of rumors. Yeah. And so when someone like a Judge Crater goes missing, all those things sort of, gather, right? Was it organized crime? Was it his own romances run awry by a jealous someone or a scorned woman or whatever? Was it something else that, what we wouldn't typically think of, and an accident? Could it have been suicide? Could it have been he chose to disappear? Obviously, with any missing persons case, you go through those sorts of things. So yeah, what are the various possibilities and what are the plausibilities of those possibilities, for sure. Now, of course, our great resource there for Charlie Project, the Charlie Project, Charlie, Ley, project.org. There is a case overview on that site. And of course, we know that Megan Good does spend time. She puts a lot of time. And so she gives some sources. Of course, she's able to find them credible sources. And you can see some of the overview there of that overview that she provides, some pretty good detailed that she provides on that site. So, of course, as we know, for many cases, Charlie Project's good. Eric, I tried to watch the Hoffa movie with Nicholson, had to turn it off after 20 minutes due to the language, the same expletives and phrases over and over at the beginning. Yeah, that's maybe we didn't adequately address that last time. And certainly with those sorts of movies, whether it involves the rough side of life or organized crime, of course, there's the possibility in a case that movies being gratuitous too, and certainly that's something that we have to navigate and think through. So maybe I should have given a better forewarning for that in the last one. But Kathy, I'm not disputing your concerns there. So for sure, but appreciate your sharing that. So we have the Charlie Project. And she gives good. That's always a good source. So if I'm working through this, right, I'm saying, what's the credible work that's been done? And, I'm featuring some things here. And, of course, again, looking at the discourse that's out there on the social media and the forums. And, again, that could range from very ridiculous and unhelpful to, there might be some discussions that are substantive. If you choose to network with anyone who wants to network and collaborate, obviously forums and social media and so forth. And again, you may find if there's someone who's done an article or a podcast or a documentary, you may find some things there that have been are being promoted, right? So okay, well, I'm not a criminologist, or a lawyer, or even a historian, but I am a teacher and scholar of communication. So, and as someone too is talking about freelance journalism, citizen journalism, just generally good research, anything like that. That's documents, right? Source documents and so forth. So I have, of course, a search here on USA.gov. Now I went ahead and used his full name, and you can see, getting to know the history of Judge Crater is going to be important. Key events from his life, of course, that gets interesting anyway. But as you zero in on things, and of course, if you're looking at things that people have done, if you're looking at his legal career, if you're looking at his life, his trajectory of life, the allegations of corruption and infidelity to his wife and womanizing and so forth. And so I find some interesting things. So for instance, I go to the Library of Congress, and again, this is just of interesting note. And this is from so this would have been, of course, early 20th century. And so we're looking at 1930. And so it did create a role in any big cases in New York. That would be a very important consideration for a judge, just like if you were dealing with a lawyer. Was he involved in any, on the defense or the prosecution side, was he involved in any cases? Very good question that one would want to put on the table, because that creates obviously a vulnerability point. So we have a picture there, right? New justice to the appellate court is sworn in today. And I'm not going to share every single one of these, but you can see also this is interesting about a gentleman from the different sites in terms of some of the older newspapers. Some of the different coverage of the, pursuit of the case, right? And of course, over the years, various claims have been tested along the way. You can see discussions about, let's see here, older newspaper articles. Let's see, I got an interesting one here. Let's see here. Let me just miss my link here. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Discussion from, the early, when, the discussion happened over a period of years of when he's going to be declared dead, right? Which would have happened. Eventually, he was declared dead by 1939, right? And we've talked about that before, right? When, obviously someone goes missing and, notwithstanding the reality of, the search and what the likelihoods and so forth, there's the realities that go with certain sorts of affairs and items needing to be dealt with. And so he was declared dead by 1939. By the way, I wanted to also post earlier, and this was cited on the PA Center for the Book site, and this was just that piece from ABC about that letter that was discovered. When you read about that letter, and you look at some of the material about the judge's life in terms of the corruption and the womanizing and having connections with organized crime, and the scenario that's presented in that letter does tend to be plausible in terms of that this group of folks murdered him. The letter, and I'm off the ABC News site now. This is from 2006, but that in 2000, so that the letter's posted 2006, but initially 2005. And I'm just quoting from it, right? Paraphrasing, quoting, 1930, Judge Crater, right, stepped off a Midtown Manhattan curb and into a cab. After seeing a Broadway play with his showgirl girlfriend, he was never heard from again. That's pretty much a quote. And then this gets into the discussion of that some of the ideas about suspicion of organized crime. But then in 2005, there was this letter that we talked about. And as the article here says, ABC News, right? At that time, at least, and again, one would have to study this further and see what sorts of study is. There's things that this woman wrote in this letter that were corroborated. So there was a group of folks, at least two here, and I'm just looking at this article and one or two other things I've read, that were involved in this murder, and could have been involved, of course, had an organized crime connection, and might have involved a a police officer, that might have been tied to this sort of group. Yeah, conflicting stories when he was last seen. Did he get into the cab or walk down the street, right? And so that becomes part of it too, especially after all these years. Even those last moments, and that's something that comes up with more recent cases, right? We think about cases we've talked about or that Ed has talked about, or you've talked about on Think Tank, or we've referenced here. You think about that disappearance, right? And part of it is, well, what happened in that last 1 day, half a day, hour, 2 hours before this person seemingly disappeared? Maybe the last time that someone saw him. And there's a few cases I have in mind here, but just from the last 20, 30 years, from the last 5, 10 years, right? Still trying to navigate, right, what we can know about that based on any sort of video evidence or documentary evidence, or what people say or what people claim, right? That's part of it, or what people might remember or try to remember, and we know how difficult that can be anyway. Okay. And so there's certainly certain cases I have in mind here that Unfound has covered, but others too. That in itself, and then over the passage of time, that becomes more difficult. So the history.com piece is helpful. The Megan's piece is helpful. That ABC News is a helpful sort of supplement. I got an article here, 1939. Right, Evening Star, Washington, D.C. Of course, when you're looking at these old Library of Congress newspapers, you might have to, depending on the size of the article, you might have to go to another page, or it might lead you to it. But those Library of Congress, those databases, the older newspapers are very helpful. And then on USA.gov, of course, you can just go with Joseph Crater, and you'll see. And again, keep in mind, every search aspect isn't necessarily going to be found, because it might cross over with some similar terms that have nothing to do with the case. Sometimes the facts before someone goes missing are sketchy at best, conflicting, or people change their stories or leave out some things they know. And there are different reasons why people may do that. And of course, one of the cases that I have in mind right now, of course, is Cameron Remmer. We through this coverage on Unfound and discussions that have been had, right, we don't know. That's one of the things that Ed and the team have been so diligent, right, have been thinking about, and that case has been talked about. But you think about any case, right, the motivations that people might have for not saying something or leaving something out. And it might be very well-meaning from their point of view. I'm not saying they should do that, right? But that could be a key ingredient. Of course, if someone was involved in that disappearance or involved in something else surrounding that disappearance and they don't want that known, okay, that could be a problem for sure. Okay, for sure. Okay, so I sent out some additional search there from we have, okay, I might have sent this one out already, but I'm just trying to feature some of the older news articles there. But now this is very important things to consider. So if I'm going to be taking on this case intensely, right, I'm going to start with my most credible sort of entry sites, informational overviews. What are some of the open questions? I'm going to start, of course, looking at the older materials in terms of the claims over the years. Of course, I'm going to go to some genealogy. Now, I'm not saying this hasn't been studied before by people. It might have been, of course. And so, just as a matter of interest, and I'm on ancestry.com. This might be the only place you can find this. It might be available on some other government site too. Right. And so I have World War I draft registration card for Joseph F. Crater. And so this would have been Looks like it was processed 1917. And then we know this is him because it lists the birth date 1889. Easton, PA, was where he was born. That's him. He's listing himself here as an attorney and so forth, right? So this is his draft card. Again, ancestry.com. And I won't I'll mention that. I won't necessarily share it. If you are, well, I think there is a way. Well, let me just for now. If you have ancestry.com or you can access it for free at your library, that however you choose to access it, you can look up Joseph Force Crater or Joseph Crater, again, birth 1889 on ancestry.com, and you'll see that. And those draft cards might also be available on some other sites, maybe, but I'm just to give credit to Ancestry there. But it's definitely a historical aspect, that would be important. We recently discussed Steve Davis's disappearance in San Francisco. He lived in the Richmond district in San Francisco in 1986. I'm reading from Kathy here. Cameron walked out from the Fairmont and never seen again. Steve lived west of the Fairmont in Mark Hopton hotels, very old hotels built in 1902, 1920, of course. And so I'm more familiar with the Cameron Remmer case. Helped a little bit on that. Ed did the bulk of the work, obviously, but some team folks helped. That's one of it. In my opinion, the Cam Remmer case is a Hall of, what I've said, I think publicly on this, a Hall of Fame episode for Ed. I think it was 3 hours, Kathy? And so in these cases, right? And then the other interesting thing, like with Cam Remmer or like with Crater or any of them, you start to think about some of the things that they might or might not have been involved with, or the people around them were involved with. And that, of course, gives you a sense of the spheres of influence around them, their networks, who might have been involved. Of course, in the Crater case, when you look at some of these materials and you look at the possibility of organized crime, of course, that loops into other sorts of things. And I know that when you're talking about missing persons, okay, or if you're talking about cold cases in general, right, unsolved murders, right, where the person's been found, okay, for instance, right, when you're thinking about organized crime involvement and you're having to sift through decades worth of material obtained by disclosure of government records, freedom of information records, things the government says, things that law enforcement says, things that those have, testified or informed have said, or people that have occasionally have written certain books, experts in organized crime, both scholars and journalists, for sure. You can sometimes sift through those sorts of things and find some of those interesting connections. And you'll see in that ABC News piece there, I mentioned, I believe it talks about Frank Costello and connections there in terms of allegedly being connected to these sorts of things. After 4 hours, I believe, the Fairmont is very extensive to stay at, very plush. I've walked through there a couple of times. And of course, I don't have my Cam Remmer notes in front of me, but if I recall correctly, Kathy, we were dealing with someone who was basically putting Cam up there. There's, of course, some open question as to whether that person did or would or wouldn't have been involved in the disappearance, but certainly had knowledge of some period of Cam's last phase of being seen. And it's very expensive. That's a good reminder. Now, of course, in the case of Crater, this guy is someone who seemingly was fairly well off and certainly seemed to enjoy the high life. And of course, just because you are well off and enjoy the high life doesn't mean you're breaking any laws or corrupt. That doesn't mean you even have to cheat on your wife. But certainly Crater seemingly, allegedly, was crossing those various boundaries, which adds more disappearance risk, I guess one would say for sure. So again, I would certainly add to the mix here going through the genealogy sites, ancestry.com, familysearch.org, and so forth, right? And again, that's whatever those genealogy sites that are out there, right, for sure. would be important. Now, again, people that have written about Crater certainly have looked into those sorts of things. There was, and this, if I were going to pursue this, and so the PA department of the book, PR Center for the book, as well as other sites, right, mentioning that 2005 letter, mentioning that, and of course the PA Center for the book, mentioning the memoir from Stella Crater in the 60s. And I would also go ahead and read this book by Richard Toffel, 2004, Vanishing Point: The Disappearance of Judge Crater and the New York He Left Behind. And that's cited here on the Pennsylvania Center for the Book. I certainly would spend time and read that book. I would look at people's footnotes, endnotes, references, whatever they're doing. It sounds like Crater was at risk of being murdered for various reasons. Absolutely. And of course, one has to look at that and sort of create an inventory of what are the likelihoods. Of course, there's always the possibility that it wasn't for one of those reasons. But seems like for his life, a lot of those things would overlap, whether he chose to run away or whether he committed suicide or was murdered by, one of a number of people. Right? Certainly his life creates those risks. Now, that doesn't mean he deserved anything. That's not the implication. But one has to look at these sorts of things objectively as possible, right? And we know that from the work we do here too. And by the way, I want to mention here again, we talk about collaboration and networking. I mean, this has been a theme of ours from the start. And you think about our wonderful group here, think tank people, what EDS does. I don't think I ever even knew about or heard about Crater. I mean, it's possible, but it was not on my mind. And when I was doing that number 11 episode, our overview episode, which was a great episode, thanks to not just me, but all of the people involved, we covered a lot of ground. It was Ed who suggested it, right? And so it's like, yeah, okay. And again, at this point, this is not one I'm going to spend, as much as I do on other cases, but who knows, that may change someday. And it's something I'm definitely going to keep more on my horizon and our horizon as an example. And it provides a really good case study that if you were going to pursue this, right, for intense study, or maybe say, you know what, I'm not even going to get so intensely into it, but I want this out there. I want this to be known. Well, now we say, okay, what are those identifiably credible sources, right? We got Charlie Project, we got Pennsylvania Center for the Book, and so forth, right? For sure. So if we're even just trying to prompt that conversation, and let me just take I don't want to say a break, but let me just put on the table our other question now. And this isn't just for Crater, but for a lot of these older cases. And so the question was for serious study and discussion, how can we bring more focused attention to unsolved disappearances that occurred more than a few decades ago? Of course, there's a lot of that material out there. There's a good reason why I had that clarifying, phrase or section on the front end of that sentence, for serious study and discussion. Right? Now, I realize not everyone watching this is going to necessarily do deep, intensive study on a new project in their life. But if we're going to talk about missing persons cases, if we're going to publicize missing persons cases, right, if we're going to possibly get interested in deeper study, if we're going to advocate for missing purposes. So again, like I always say, whether you're doing journalism or advocacy or PR or general interest, being a good audience member, engaging people like Ed and others with good discussion, right? We want serious study and discussion. So bringing attention to those credible sources. So again, if you have any thoughts on that, again, how could we bring more focused attention to unsolved disappearances that occurred more than a few decades ago? Of course, I have obviously a bias in these areas, right? It's not unknown that I have been interested in cases that do go back more than a few decades ago. Teach more about Crater and people like him in criminology, political, and government classes. I would agree with that as an academic. And let me add to that as a communications instructor, media classes, journalism classes, political communication classes, whatever's being taught. right? Whatever's being taught. Again, although I do some journalism, I'm not a journalism professor. My background, again, is communication rhetorical studies. Even when I teach things tied to media, it's more block and tackle or basic, less so advanced than someone who is a media scholar or journalism scholar would do. But coming from a general communication standpoint and a classical rhetoric and argumentation standpoint, obviously I have a great interest in making sure that good material is taught. So 100% agree. And maybe what we can do as individuals, whatever we do in life, whether we're retired or we're in academia or we're working at the shoe store or we're working in an office job at an oil company, whatever, right? If we're interested in these cases, whether it be through word of mouth or social media or forums or our email contacts, and like the last episode, I'll go ahead and email a couple of these citations from tonight. But and again, we have a way to go to update data gems, but they're in these chats, right? And that's good to know. So yes, I agree with that 100%, Kathy. Get this into curriculum. And again, not necessarily an official class, the classes that are being taught. Now, if someone wants to have class ideas or educational seminars or go to their local, community college and say, hey, we want to ask you to host a roundtable on old cases. Absolutely. I have taken all of these classes in high school and college, and he was not mentioned, but all of my education after second grade has been in California, the West Coast. That is possible that this is a region. So this isn't like the Hoffa case where you have as much national attention. The case does have some national attention. It obviously has some national import, but it has, obviously, if you're not in that region, you might not be as quick to talk about it, okay, or think about it. It might not be on one's radar, as they say, as quickly. So that's understandable. Okay, that's understandable. But it's a case that has a lot of material to study and potential work to be done. If there was someone out there who was wanted to start a new project as a journalist, or as a historian or a criminologist or and so forth, right? There's more that could be done. Of course, there's a lot of things that have been written. I don't know right now, currently, if anyone's pursuing it so aggressively that they're finding anything substantially new. For sure. I will say too, mentioning again, tryyournewspapers.com search. And if you were, again, you might find, I never had an instructor lecture about Hoffa either, maybe for political science majors. That's an interesting question. Maybe, and again, I'm not in this area, but maybe if someone were in a labor history class or a discussion of an economics or a political science discussion just in general about labor, maybe Hoffa's name comes up. It might be the case, Kathy, and I don't want to presume here to make such a general judgment about academia, far from it, but maybe just in general, there's not enough discussion about it, about cases like this. Even Hoffa, even more prominent cases. Of course, if someone's in a media class and they're watching certain things like a movie or something, but are we doing it comprehensively enough? And now I'm even thinking here, right? I'm thinking here, am I doing enough to make sure that in academia, in my sphere of influence, that enough is being done? That's a good question. That's a really good question. So on newspapers.com, again, you might be able to access that at your local library. It is paid, generally to really get at the action. So I'm not going to necessarily share any links here. I could, but it would be generally requiring paid access. But I will say, if you were doing, research on this on newspapers.com, you would find material. Now, remember the Google News Archive search, and I just thought now of trying this. And so I'm going to put in Joseph Force Crater. And again, Google allows this up. They really don't update it much as far as I know. This is interesting. And then I'm just going to go back and go Joseph Crater once and see what we come up with. But this is from 1938. And I'll just put this out. Crater's widow has remarried. And so there was this is just by way of example. As we look at old articles where I mention them, I'm not even close to enough to, obviously you'd want to have a timeline, of course, by relying on the materials that have been written that would help you. Key events, obviously people, live their lives, move their lives forward. I'd want to read her memoir from the 60s. And so forth. And then I'm going on here, and if there's anything I see that is relevant, I just did Joseph Crater on the Goo. So this is interesting here, and I'm going to send this out. Obviously, it's turned out to not be the case as far as they know. This is Lewiston Evening Journal, 1930. The one I just sent out was the Owasso Argus Press, 1938. This is Lewiston Evening Journal, found in water, body believed to be craters, recovered from Upper Bay in New York. It's hard to exactly read. Answers description of missing jurists. Numerous detail included mutilated fingers, missing a month. So we don't obviously know for sure if this, at the time they didn't, but obviously over time, that would obviously has at least been argued or classified not to match him. Someone else, of course, which is important. Maybe reviewing the wife's book could generate some interest. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, That's good thought. It's good thought. Carol, can you hear me? You can hear me. Good, Carol. That's a great one. Yeah, maybe reviewing the wife's book. That's a great idea. Someone reviewing that book, sort of trying to read it, revive it. Thank you, Carol, for joining us. That's a good one. That's a really good idea. That's a really good idea. So by reading the book and going through the old newspaper articles, one would have to look at the various things. And again, I'm nowhere even close to, I like to study the old newspaper articles and read the book. So if I were going to pursue this deeply, I'm not drawing any implications from anything that's there now because I've not thought enough about it. Anything I've shared or cited, right, stands there on its own in terms of quality, credibility, or what are still open questions. Obviously, there are things that we know, right? After all these years, he's still considered missing. If it was the events from the 2005 letter, although things are corroborated in that letter according to police, how do we verify that this group actually did it? Kathy, I wondered if his wife knew about all his philandering. How could she know or not suspect? That would be a good guiding reflection. For sure. Right? Absolutely. There may be some insights on that in her memoir and so forth, as well as the other book I mentioned, as well as the newspaper articles. Right? So one would have to sit through and do that. Of course, what I would do is, whether I was reviewing the book in a blog post or getting really interested in this case, like obviously some other ones I have, I would publicize that interest. Now, my saying that I always say, there's someone out there who knows something or knows someone who knows something. Now, in a case this old, that may be more difficult, but you never know. I guess it might be there's someone out there who knows something or knows of someone who knows something who knows something, and we could go on and on with that. But you never quite know. Like in the case of this letter from 2005, right? Do not open until death. And so, but who else knows who knows what? And as I say, when there's a crossover, especially when you get into the organized crime dimension of this, okay, whether it's a disappearance or someone that's been found but murdered, and when you start to sort through the government documents and you start to sort through the testimonies that are available and the interviews that are done and the podcasts that are, adequately credible, and you've heard me comment before about, unfortunately, things are all over the place on YouTube and other places. There's patterns and there's crossovers. Of course, over time, more becomes known. Government hearings and so forth. And so this is an area where, at least from a journalistic point of view, or let's just say even from just an everyday person's point of view, I've developed a little bit of expertise in trying to see some of these crossovers. And as one does sort of expand out slowly and reasonably on cases, that information can be helpful. Obviously, working with this group and, things that Ed has done on his interviews and some things that I've either specifically run with or just as a general knowledge, that's very important. And even on some interest I have in cold case murders, not necessarily missing persons outside of here, where the body's been found, but there's still very much an open question as to who was involved, and if there's the possibility of organized crime. Right? There's certainly patterns of research that one can go through and see those crossover. And I, even outside of Unfound here, plan to do some more with those sorts of cold case situations and one or two collaborations along those lines. Okay. For cold case murders. But for disappearances, obviously, that's a similar idea. Okay. So, but on the other side of that coin, notwithstanding the 2005 letter, when you look at this sort of case, there may be other things unrelated to that corruption or organized crime. You just never know. And Carol, please continue to chime in as we go through this. Any other ideas? So I really like what we've talked about so far in terms of integrating into education, and it's the high school and college, community college, 2-year, 4-year, and then also this idea, reviewing the wife's book could revive inference about the case. Not something right now I'm necessarily on my own able to do. Maybe someday, but if there's someone here or watching this or in our circle and beyond who might say, wow, maybe I should do that. That would be a really good idea. Right. And then of course you'd want to get that done and get that nice and polished. And then, post it out there on social media and forums. Of course, you could always, if you had a blog or something, you could do it there. You could also do it nowadays, right? You could do a video. If you did video reviews of these sorts of things. And heck, maybe I someday should do something like that as I'm trying to get back on track and sort of expanding my own content generation. Then there's also the possibility you could submit that sort of review to a publication that's either digital or print. So we're getting some great ideas here tonight. Again, if anyone has any more ideas about publicizing these sorts of cases, I think the Crater case provides a good case study because, hey, we know it's a case that's out there. It has regional significance. It certainly has some national knowledge. Obviously not as, talked about as a Hoffa case, but it's the kind of case that should be publicized. Of course, we care about all missing persons and we want to publicize them as much as possible. Of course, our focus here would be the historical cases, right? Cases more than a few decades ago. Even though I take a particular interest in those sorts of cases, I try, maybe I need to do better, but definitely try to keep whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, probably more Facebook nowadays. I should go back to doing it more on Twitter, is sharing or resharing what other people share about this or that person that's gone missing. Now, recently, in the last hours, days, months, past few years, because if we're going to use these tools, right, there's a lot of junk on social media, but there's also good material. And if we're going to use this material, these tools, we might as well use them for good things, right? We might as well use them for good things. Again, on the Charlie Project, you get a great overview. I'd also go ahead and follow some of the materials that Megan cites. Of course, she cites some things we've talked about, some things we haven't talked about. And so go ahead and cite that. And although she cites the memoir, cites the Vanishing Point book, she's not necessarily reviewing those books. So actually, even reviewing those books would be interesting. Now, Megan on here says it was updated 06. She's pretty thorough, runs a pretty significant site, as you know. So, I won't say she can get to everything all the time, always updating, but she's thorough. So again, but keep that Charlie Project available. Now, again, General Google, you can use General Google if you're using good search terms and willing to look at multiple pages with good search terms. I would also, of course, go to Google Scholar just to see what is out there. Scholar.google.com. Of course, I can see that. Yeah, that's going to give you some different material. Now I have the search string I use there is Judge Joseph Force Crater. You can adjust that search string on your own, and I'll just do it. You can do it Joseph Crater or whatever. So I just use the full name. I'm not going to keep going through that. You can see what comes up and what's relevance. Okay, and you can see some other things that have been written. Okay, this is I did see this discussed earlier. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details, but you can see even where the Crater case might have worked it into at least one fictional sort of ideation. The other thing that's interesting, what cases were you involved in? Don't forget that Google Scholar is a way of looking up case law. So I don't know for sure. Of course, he was a lawyer too, so I could, you could go through the case law section of, and there's different settings you can use there in selecting the courts, and you'd have to know how he rendered his name as a lawyer and as a judge, how far the Google databases go back. Remember, not everything that's ever been ruled upon is on Google, but certainly that's a place to go. I'm also just taking a look here to see if I can, if Justia, Justia, has anything. This is an interesting piece here. Okay, just seeing where there's a reference. So you could do a search on a place like, and I'm not going to go through everything here that I'm finding. I'm suggesting it. Go to Justia, justia.com. Of course, this is a good resource anyway. I think we might have mentioned it before. I don't remember. But, who knows in the future. Never heard of Google Scholar until you mentioned it. Yeah, scholar.google.com. Very good resource. Not perfect, but good. But it will do the work of sorting out resources that you might find just on a regular Google search. So please, Carol, try that. scholar.google.com, whatever you're researching. Of course, when you're searching sites like Justia, justia.com, and so forth, again, the search functionality toward the top, whether you're using quotes or how you're laying out the key terms. And I'd have to, see here, Joseph, you want to try the different renderings of the name that are out there. And of course, then similar names that are out there. And always keep scrolling down on any of these sites. Right, for sure. And it looks like there's some activity there, but you can navigate that. But again, if I'm doing a regular Google search, right, I'm going to take the time. I'm going to consider quotes. I'm going to look and see what's out there. Obviously, there's going to be some junk. To be honest with you, I have not spent any time, much, if at all, on really looking at YouTube or podcasts or seeing if anyone has substantially covered this. And if there's anything helpful there, I'm going to say for the sake of discussion that I would want to be on the lookout for that. Again, I'm going to want to know what are some of the key open questions or even disputes. Who's covering it with the most accuracy, or at least intended accuracy? Who's working with credible secondary sources and going for the important primary source documents? That's going to be important for sure. Kathy, is there anything you'd like to add tonight that we've missed? And go ahead and type. I'll take my time. Carol, you too. Hopefully we're talking about some sources that are good takeaways that you can utilize. I've shared some ones that if someone wanted to get started, right, on this case, they could do so. For sure. And who knows? Like I said, right now I don't have the intention or the time, as there's so many things I'm trying to catch up on. Missing persons, cold cases in general, and beyond in life. So I'm not going to commit to diving too deeply into this case. But by covering it for this episode, it really provides a good case study on a lot of the tools that we've talked about, right? USA.gov and scholar.google.com. And, what are some of those credible materials out there, again, like a Charlie Project for this case. Now, the PA Center for the book, it was for that number 11 episode that we did, that there were 2 cases on that episode that I cited, the Pennsylvania Center for the book. And they've all, obviously this is a good overview. Kathy, no, I'm sorry, I don't know more about historical disappearances. I am not. And if there's more you want to type, keep typing, and that's okay, because we're here to learn from each other. And we had some outstanding suggestions tonight for that. Okay. But I think this case provides not a politics person and not a huge history buff, and that's understood. But there are things you definitely know, Kathy. And again, all of us tonight had some really helpful suggestions, Carol, too. This case does, let me suggest this, even if you're not going to dive too much into it and so forth, some of the material, like the PA Center for the book or some of the other things I've shared, share it, word of mouth, talk about it. I think and I'm going to make the case here, and of course, again, I'm someone who's biased towards studying these older cases, but by raising, and again, there's all sorts of discussions about older cases out there, but we need more of it and more of the cases, and we need substantial discussions. And that's why I said for serious study and discussion, the sign of discussion that Unfound engages in, right? Ed's programming and all of us. And we want that to spill out, right? We want that to spill out. We want that to impact, because so the awareness we've talked about, when we started this endeavor, almost 2 years ago now, and awareness was a key, raising awareness, right? And so we want awareness, we want accuracy, and so forth. And so this is a sort of case that you could push a little bit, right, in terms of sharing, in terms of word of mouth, if one wanted to get a little bit more interested. So I think by doing that, sort of the backdrop of these historical cases, getting those attention, I think that it can build into the larger appreciation for the serious study and discussion of cases. Now, I believe there's always the possibility, of course, that these sorts of cases can be solved to the extent possible, right? Which is important to at least try. We also see how there can be information and research and perspective and arguments, argumentation, debate, discussion that sort of crossovers and relevance across these cases. Carol, is there anything you want to add too? I may want to make sure you want to have a chance here. And I'll just give you a moment to type. Okay. No, these historical cases are tough, but that's the point of this podcast, to generate some ideas. Absolutely. The difficulty of these cases, right? If you go back to my episode, if you can find it, Donna Jean, Michael Lanko, and I never had a chance to, I mispronounced it there. That was something I wasn't attentive to, but that was my fault, not Ed's fault. But that from the late 60s, right? And I'm starting to dig back into that, and more to come on that. But other cases too, right? These are difficult cases with the passage of time, right? Certainly. People die, people move, people don't want to talk, people's memories. There are things that are accurate and inaccurate out there, right? So forth. Very difficult. But it is challenging, and that is the point, right? Generating ideas, not just about this case, although this case, but also about these types of cases and missing persons cases in general. You can see how we made that connection back to the Cam Remmer case or other similar cases, right? And again, back to Kathy, that timeline of things towards that period of time, whether it's a week, whether it's 3 days, whether it's 2 days, 2 hours, 2 seconds, 2 minutes, what was happening by that person before they disappeared, right? That's important. Important in Crater's case, right? Certainly we can see in the Cam Remmer case how that's important. Okay. As I always say, someone out there knows someone or knows someone who knows something. Again, let's keep on our radar, the unfoundpodcast.com. Please review some of those earlier texts from when you got here. If you're watching this episode after it's distributed in the weeks ahead, please share this when it's available. And we appreciate the contribution of our think tank folks, and on an ongoing basis, and even for this episode. Again, go to theunfoundpodcast.com, theunfoundpodcast.com. I want to thank both Carol and Kathy for their very helpful contributions tonight. Very helpful contributions tonight. I thought this discussion went well. I will, in the next 24 hours, follow up with just an email. Hey, here's some things we talked about, but you got it. That's more for the people that weren't here. Ed and I will be reminding folks to watch and share and keep an eye out for things that are happening. And again, we want to thank everyone. Thanks again to Kathy. Thanks again to Carol. Folks, have a great week and good job tonight. Thank you. I'm now ending this Unfound on the Ground, number 18, The Disappearance of Judge Crater.